Hi, my name is Theodora Samiotis, and on behalf of CAP, the Canadian Association of Heritage Professionals, want to welcome you to today's first inaugural workshop. It's our first of 4 virtual workrooms that we're going to be putting together in the next month. Block your calendars every Thursday at this time and join us. Today's discussion will be on planners, but we have 3 other ones following on every Thursday following from the 9th, the 16th, 23rd, culminating in the national conference on the 29th of September with a, we have slides too. So on the 29th of September, just a quick note, please make sure that you are muted when we start, and during the discussions, if you just need to speak, you can unmute yourself. Encouraging you to use the chat function. I think after 18 months of Zooming, we're trying to make this as interactive as possible. So we really encourage you to use the chat function. We're going to be going into breakout rooms following an initial discussion from our 3 panelists. And then after the breakout rooms, we will be coming back to the plenary to just have closing remarks. The intent today is to share, to have a discussion. These discussions are going to be captured in those breakout rooms as well. We're going to have a Miro board trying to bring in all the common themes that we will be revisiting every week as we meet with the different groups. And we will be bringing back all of that information to the final session, where each of our moderators will be involved in a panel talking about the common themes that we're going to be hearing about over the next 4 weeks. With that, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's session. It's Chris Uchiyama, who is president of Canadian Association of Heritage Practitioners and also principal manager of Heritage Consulting Services at LHC. So Chris, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Theodora. And I would like to start this discussion of heritage, communities, and climate action by acknowledging that I am joining this virtual event from where I live as a settler on the traditional ancestral territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat on land that is covered with Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. And I'd also like to acknowledge that panelists and participants will be joining us from a variety of territories today. So I think on the heels of the most recent IPCC climate report, it's more important than ever for us to understand our role in climate action as heritage professionals. And the idea of this workroom series is to give us an opportunity to bring together different voices from different perspectives in the heritage field in order to discuss and better understand what our contribution is and our role in climate action. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce the 4 panelists that are going to be joining us in this first session of our workroom series, Planners and the Planet. The goal today was to bring together a panel of heritage professionals that have a range of experiences based on their professional experience, as well as the social, economic, and environmental challenges that their municipalities are grappling with. Brittany Dack is a registered professional planner who's been working in the heritage sector in BC for more than a decade in community planning, museums, historic sites. She's currently senior heritage planner at the City of New Westminster and is the current board chair of Heritage BC, past president of the BC Heritage Affairs Society, and past chair of a local community heritage commission. Daryl Carreau is joining us, and he's been actively involved in the heritage conservation sector for over 30 years in both the private and the public sector. He's been the senior heritage planner for both the cities of Edmonton and Calgary and is currently managing the City of Calgary's Historic Buildings Program. Elijah Spadlan is joining us from the City of Vancouver, which he recently joined as a heritage planner. He was formerly a heritage conservation specialist in the private sector. He's an active member in CAP and in our British Columbia chapter as well. And I love this direct quote. He finds joy in sharing his knowledge and expertise to build capacity and facilitate conversations in conservation. And last but not least, Eric Hansen is joining us. He's the Heritage Preservation Officer for the City of Peterborough, where he oversees the identification and protection of the city's heritage resources. He manages the city's very robust heritage tax relief program, coordinates the work of the Municipal Heritage Committee, and provides technical expertise to council, staff, and the public on issues of heritage. So as we begin this panel discussion, I'd like to encourage everyone that's joining us today to use the chat function for questions and comments. Make sure you're sending the comments to all participants so that we can reflect your input on the Miro board at future events and in the upcoming green paper that we'll be pulling together from this series. I think, Tom, would it be possible to share those 4 questions again on the slide, just to remind us all of the topics that we're going to be covering to frame all of these, all of the events in our series? We'll be covering the same 4 broad questions from all of the different perspectives. Today, we're starting with a much more high-level planning sort of perspective, and then we'll move on to design, engineering, and trades. So here are the 4 questions, and they'll be in the chat periodically to remind everyone of them. I think maybe the best place to start our discussion today would be to invite the panel to identify from your experiences and your communities the one major issue or obstacle to improving sustainable practice in our industry. And maybe that'll give us a sense of where you're coming from and the context that you're sharing today. Eli, would you mind starting off that conversation? I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but
I was kind of hoping Eric would start this conversation. Yeah, because I'm sure he's got a hands-on experience. Yeah, might be too early for the pun. I recently joined the City of Vancouver as a heritage planner, and my background is in technical conservation specialist or technical conservation. So I think when it comes to sustainability, I think the challenge is that it's still, and it's not a bad thing. It revolves around carbon emission and energy consumption. The heritage premium costs essentially are increasing over time, but there is a lack of training in proper conservation materials and methods, and there is some sort of demand for efficiency, whatever that efficiency means in terms of like who the lowest bidders usually are, gets the job for some of the conservation work that happens, not necessarily on the bigger projects. I'm not talking about those capital improvements that are happening potentially in Ontario or elsewhere, but more in like residential neighborhoods in smaller historic districts per se. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Would any of the other panelists like to chime in or respond to what Eli's identified there?
Sure, I'll jump in. I had in my notes for this question about obstacles was actually the transfer of knowledge. So I'm really picking up on what Eli said about training. And in that, I find often, especially in larger municipalities, but I notice even in mine, which is a mid-scale municipality, that there isn't enough crossover or that like technical expertise across all the different groups who work on building files. So that's planners, building inspectors, plan checkers, all the groups, even sometimes technical consultants, especially on the smaller projects. You know, the knowledge base there is lacking, and I think the answer to my next question about what the opportunity is the need for sharing. So I know the knowledge is out there, I know it exists, but we're just not necessarily tapped into it. And I see that happening in a lot of different places, at least in British Columbia.
Chris, you're muted.
I'm absolutely muted, of course. I was trying to reduce the background noise. So maybe I'll throw that to you, Daryl. From your experience, what's the major issue?
Well, it's interesting. Brittany just said that one of the obstacles is knowledge transfer. I see that as an opportunity. As you know, experts in reusing buildings, we have to, you know, given the situation, we have to start reusing all of our buildings. We are already experts in reusing buildings. And I think a lot of what our experience, our knowledge can be transferred to newer buildings. And I see that as a real opportunity. Yeah, I'm a bit reluctant to jump into the obstacle discussion because I see the obstacles as much, you know, basically the obstacle is capitalism to what we have to do. Yeah, I'm not sure, you know, and I think we have to start talking about that because, you know, we have to, you know, if we're going to really be sustainable, you know, our whole existence is based on consumption and growth, and that can't continue.
I saw your face light up, Eric.
Oh, way to steal my thunder, Daryl. My first comment was the climate crisis exists because of unbridled capitalism. And the problem is that the same forces are not going to be the ones to stop it. I would say that profit making is the biggest impediment that we face, at least in Ontario, and I think it's probably true across the country. I think that the development sector is in the business of making money. And we are still seen as an impediment to the profit motive. I don't think that, and that's kind of at a core. But then you couple that with a political will that's driven by short-term, like the need for short-term political gain, so that you end up with councils measuring progress through short-sighted metrics like expanded tax base, or you know, the great myth of job creation that everybody says comes with these big projects. We're also bounded because we are creatures of the province, municipalities. We suffer from the vicissitudes of political will, and right now, you know, especially with the arrival of the Ford government, we saw radical reworking in favor of the profit makers, the way that we're expected to do business in Ontario to preserve, you know, heritage assets. And it's been made much more difficult through changes to the act that were enacted this year. The other thing is that I think we look at two-dimensional solutions to the climate crisis. In Ontario anyway, there's this fixation with crowding and transit. If we just pile everybody into one square block and build the building 300 miles high and then put a subway in the basement to take people where they want to go, somehow that fixes climate change, as opposed to looking at what we've got on the landscape, this vast embedded carbon sink of built structures. And as Daryl said, go way beyond what's heritage at this point. We are the teachers on how to make it all work, whether it's historic or not. And I think one big issue then is, how do we get the public to understand that our proselytizing isn't about vanity or elitism. It's about the fact that heritage is way bigger than anything everybody thinks it is. Whether it's about historic buildings or not, it's about expertise we bring to solving a problem from where we come from ourselves.
Eric pretty much just summarized my entire 2-page note. Yeah, I think in hearing what Brittany, Daryl, and Eric mentioned, what I heard was there is a advocacy that is an issue, like a sense of missing understanding between other professions. It seems like we're still kind of siloed in terms of our approach, even in heritage conservation and even policy making. The education component even within our profession, our heritage profession, we seem to say that, yeah, we understand and adopt the standards and guidelines, but there's still varying in interpretations, even when between our professional members. There is that whole talk about what is sustainable development, but is it more about the concern of, yeah, like the capitalist or capitalism. And then there's also, I heard, public policy, misunderstanding of planning tools. And for some municipalities, it seems like there's too many rules and too many things, and it's so hard for people to understand on how to properly, or not even properly, but just do a good conservation within the lens of sustainable development. And by sustainable, I just mean reduction of resource extraction by using what are built structures.
Brittany, did you want to?
I was going to jump in. I feel I'm going to be a bit the contrarian today, as much as I probably am on the same page here about how great it would be to dismantle capitalism. I also think that that's a really ambitious goal, and you know, obviously, hopefully we can work on it. But I also think what I see happening in some of my work as well is just that tendency to say this is bigger systemic issues, and it's hard to find those practical boots on the ground solutions that are going to change today. So we can start doing better conservation practice tomorrow, which will then help us, you know, build towards a place where we're dismantling a larger systemic issue. So for me, there's a real conversation to be had as well about what is being implemented today and how do we make that as best as it can be. And for me, I'm really drawing on those other types of points that Eli is making about education and you know, bringing people together and advocacy and getting heritage as a field into the room. And in British Columbia, that's one of our really big struggles as well, is actually, and to steal, I think, Daryl's point of all the issues are also opportunities, but getting ourselves into the room and into the conversation with the building code people, with the energy and envelope consultants, and being part of those conversations is really a big opportunity / challenge.
Okay. Maybe we can drill down in that, is I think maybe what we can talk about is tools, right? Like what would you need in your municipality to try and take advantage of some of these opportunities? What tools or what support would you need from something else to bring heritage out of its silo into that broader conversation?
I think if we're going to address climate change, sustainability, it requires, it's not going to be solved from the bottom up. It's going to have to be I think the situation is so dire, so urgent. We don't have time to work through a bottom-up solution. I think it's going to require a top-down solution and mandates from the federal government to take the kind of actions that we need to take. You know, if you look at, you know, what's going on in Alberta, you know, we're going to be extracting carbon forever, according to our government here. And, you know, we're not going to stop that from the bottom up. So I think, you know, what we need to be thinking about political change And I know that the National Trust, has been lobbying for years. I read an interesting fact. Well, I hope it's a fact. It was a reputable source. Google spends, I can't remember the total amount they spend on lobbying. They spend less than 4% of their lobbying budget lobbying about climate change.
I totally agree with Daryl. I think it's got to be a top-down solution, but it also, and this is not a comment relating at all to the upcoming election. Seriously, the real change comes at the ballot box, that we need to have leaders that are committed to understanding the nature of the crisis at the expense of the people that fund their campaigns. Sorry, guys, and that only happens when it happens when the voters know what to ask their politicians for and what to demand in the platforms at election time. And maybe that's the opportunity, to Brittany's point is maybe, because a top-down solution only happens when the people at the top want the solution that we're looking for. Maybe the grassroots undertaking is mobilizing the voters to demand that the right people end up in power. And so, but I feel like, and we touched on it earlier, that we're at this odd point where at some point we stop being about heritage preservation. We start being about, global salvation. And at what point are we not heritage anymore? We bring a skill set as heritage people to fixing this mess. But at some point, I know how to use a pipe wrench. It doesn't make me a plumber, but it means I bring a skill to a bigger picture, like stopping a leak. And I bring my tools and my understanding with me into a new milieu. Like maybe it isn't fixing the world isn't about us doing it as heritage people. It's about us taking our expertise as heritage people and taking it to the big problem, which isn't about heritage. And I think, so maybe we stop thinking ourselves as heritage first. Maybe we think about ourselves as world fixers first, who happen to have the tools through heritage conservation to do it. Because in the end, no matter which way you look, the thing that's going to save us, if we continue to demand growth as part of an economic system to survive, what's going to save us is not building new stuff, but fixing the stuff we've got. And we're the ones who know how to do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I don't want to leave the impression that we're helpless. What I think what we need to do at our level. I work for a municipality. We have a sustainability office. They don't have much authority. We need a sustainability czar at the city. But every meeting I'm going into now, talking about building conservation, I'm going to be asking the question, how do we get this to net zero? We have to be, that's the North Star that we have to achieve. And we can be at our levels, we can start demanding that, asking those tough questions of our managers, of our supervisors, and speaking out. Eric's absolutely right. This is a crisis, and it's not going to be solved by advocating for more heritage conservation. It goes way beyond that. What we do is a small part of it as advocates, and we need to start speaking out forcefully about this.
Yeah, I this may be anecdotal, but I remember when I was still in university, not too long ago, I guess, and going to trips in Europe, for example, and just seeing like how they deal with heritage conservation, and it looks as though like, oh, everything is kept. It's so museumified or whatever they call it. And then a few years later, as I'm starting to work on as a heritage conservation specialist, whatever that means for people, and going to Scotland on stone conservation, you realize that as you talk to locals, they use the buildings because that's what they've got. And at the time, they they didn't have anything else. They had two world wars. And so in terms of their perception of heritage conservation, it's not so much just about all of these Eurocentric values, colonial management, and all of that, but it's also a necessity. And because in a province like BC, for example, where it's such a young, Vancouver is such a young city, I don't think that the perception is the same when it comes to heritage conservation. It's still a matter of, we're building this because the value is still based on the architectural, as opposed to this is a material stock that we need to actually conserve because we need to reduce our waste, we need to reduce resource extraction, and we also need to reduce displacement, which is another aspect of sustainability that I guess no one really talks about, which is the cultural aspect that kind of ties in all of the other pillars.
Yeah, I like that, talking about the necessity of heritage as an action and maintaining the building stock, as opposed to it as a frill, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and I think in terms of opportunity, I see CAP in particular, because of our different specialties, we already have that opportunity to engage in this cross-disciplinary conversations on how to rethink or find some kind of paradigm shift in this idea of heritage conservation. And so while that top-down approach is happening, I think simultaneously we should continue to endeavor having more of these discussions so that we can affect policy changes, so we can promote advocacy and education that is definitely lacking in capacity building, which, as Brittany mentioned, is definitely a big concern in BC.
It's interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just if there's any other tools.
Well, I just think it's interesting, the comment Elijah made about Scotland and the notion that the depth of history influences a population's capacity to kind of understand and value it. And I think one of the opportunities, I think, is that people are people get that this is a climate crisis. This is becoming sort of more and more readily accepted that something's got to happen. We're really in big trouble here. And I think one thing we should be looking at, to Elijah's point, is let's back away from the abstract notions of authenticity and preservation of materiality as paramount to what we do as heritage professionals. And I don't mean to throw away our standards and values, but selling heritage on its value in a larger scheme of saving the planet is something that people can get their heads around more readily than around the abstractions of authenticity. So quite honestly, I've given up on the battle of window replacement. Honestly, I think an old restored window is a beautiful thing, and I'd prefer it over most other windows. I absolutely refuse to allow owners to put in vinyl units, not because I've necessarily got a problem with a replacement window, but because vinyl is so hideously bad for the world. But if somebody comes to me and says, I want to put in a high-end aluminum clad wood window that matches in proportion and percentage of glazing to solids, and it's going to be a well done, highly crafted solution, I'm going to give those people the chance to do that. It isn't entirely, it's a double-edged sword. It's not as good for the world to have this window shipped from halfway across the country on a truck and put in. And I'd rather have a local craftsman fixing a window. But I also know that I buy goodwill when I let somebody use a good thermally efficient unit that gets me 80% of the way to a decent looking building. I got that person on side now when I might not if I demand such a high level of authenticity that they walk away pissed off. And I'm willing to pay that price to see new windows in a building, to know that I've got an owner on side and is going to listen to me when I come and talk about really important things. People may not agree with that. That's kind of contentious, but I got to give up on windows. I'm not going to win the battle, and I'm not going to lose the war over it.
Eric, that's the strategy I've been using my whole career. And I have seen the bar on window standards go up over time.
Mhm.
But, if you're dealing with a private building owner, he's not going to want to, pay maintenance costs to maintain wood windows on the 5th floor of their building. So what you've just described is a solution that I've seen many times.
Brittany, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I do. And hopefully my audio is a little better. Apparently I'm a bit dodgy today, so I apologize to the audience. And I was just going to echo Eric. I'm exactly in the same spot in my professional practice. And, lose the battle to win the war, I think is really key. And I also just wanted to throw out that I think we have to be careful with the idea, especially in places like British Columbia, about depth of history. There's a lot of history here that precedes the establishment of the city and other settlements around the area, and there was sustainable building practice happening long before there were settler communities. So I just want to make sure we acknowledge that. And sort of, it might be something interesting to look to, and that's maybe a conversation for a different time, but could certainly be part of the discussion and part of the puzzle. And the other piece for me that I wanted to talk about was sort of thinking in what Eric said about how do we build that level of acceptance. And that's sometimes what I struggle with, is bringing the preservation community and our heritage advocacy community and our green building community together. And that does go back to my earlier comment, and a little bit, we touched on it a little earlier in the conversation, but about bringing people together and having that conversation and being in the room and making sure we're part of those conversations. So for me, that is really echoing through what we're talking about here, whether that's at the high level or at the grassroots level. And with trades in Vancouver, often we don't have we don't have that capacity. We're not talking to each other, and that's causing us to have like fights on site, which I'm sure Eli has been part of as well.
I think that leads nicely into maybe what can be our next question, is what are heritage professionals just generally, or if you want to get specific, we can do that, but what are we failing at in trying to address the climate change?
Ooh, can I start with this one?
Yes.
And I just want to say something, because I think Eric kind of already started what I was going to say. And this may sound really controversial, and I've said it before. I think our heritage professionals need to kind of have another read at the standards and guidelines and what it really means when it comes to, or within the lens of sustainable development. Because if sustainable development, if it is defined as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs, I think that's the kind of the definition that we all know. Essentially, the golden rule is minimal intervention. And that minimal intervention, that does not necessarily mean that let me put it, I guess, in a different perspective. I think the heritage conservation approach is already kind of like a self-explanatory, like understanding first, planning, and then intervening. And if you're able, and if we're able to shift the idea of having all of our colleagues that are talking about efficiency in envelope performance, I think there are a lot of comments on the chat room talking about that, like the windows. Then it'll be easier to understand what is the most acceptable solution. And it's not so much as like a full-on restoration at all times. It could be something that we just mean what can be done to resolve or to attenuate the situation, the existing condition, in order for it to be adaptively reused.
Thanks, Eli. Any response to that or other opinions about what we're failing at as a general profession?
I mean, it's funny, in some ways you could ask the question, you know, why aren't we being heard? Maybe we're not failing. I mean, our voice is loud. It's just, it doesn't resonate with the general public. And I think partly it's because we're still seeing, you know, heritage is elitist. Heritage is about saving parts of the past. And the minute you start saving parts of the past, then you're saving the parts, you're biased, right? Every one of us will save the thing we think is important because of where our head is and where we've come from. I think in some ways, maybe what we need is a more general understanding, getting back to the notion that we bring tools from heritage, but this isn't about being preservationists. I don't know. I think we're not being heard, I think. And partly we're not being heard because it's a radical undertaking that we're talking about. We're saying, don't build your way out of this, conserve your way out of this. And that doesn't make sense. That's who mentioned it, talking about the dominant paradigm that needs to be reimagined. And it's true that the idea that growth and new build isn't how you fix things is anathema to the majority of the population. They want simple things like a person taking their lunchbox, going to the construction site and pounding nails all day to build a new building. Somehow in people's mind, that's progress. And the idea that that is utterly antithetical to the progress we need right now, maybe that's our failing, that we're not articulating that has to stop. And that's not a heritage message. So maybe that's our failing, is we're too determined to be heritage first.
Or is it our message?
Well, as long as the message is still heritage based, yeah, maybe it is partly the message then. And,
Daryl, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, yeah, I agree with most of that. And I think, if we, again, we've been doing this for decades, promoting heritage conservation, and it has all of the challenges of, appearing elitist and et cetera, but we are experts in reusing buildings. We can help save the planet. I think that's our message.
I'll jump in again. I was totally on board with Eric, and he said exactly what I was going to say, and then his follow-up sentence went in totally the opposite direction. I actually feel that it's true. We aren't being heard, and that's our fault. And I think it does tie into what Daryl's saying. A lot of our work historically has been, I'm going to call it out, it's a little elitist and it's not very diverse. And we're certainly in the kind of work that I'm seeing happen in, not everywhere in British Columbia, but generally that kind of Victorian house, because somebody sort of in the traditional history, someone important lived there. It is a bit that narrative, and I think we're really falling behind in these conversations, and we need to place ourselves really forward and do what Daryl is saying is position ourselves as part of the solution, and position ourselves and being willing to be more flexible, like what Eric is saying, and willing to do that level of advocacy and be out in the community and be promoting ourselves positively and continue that work. And obviously the message that we have so far is not landing. And that's on us. We need to figure out what our message is or how to get it out more strongly so that we are part of the political conversation.
Yeah, and I've been following the chat room, and I think there were some discussions about then how do we align conservation, or not sure how well we can align less development with that for the public, or like something. I think I struck a nerve when I said minimal intervention. I think when I'm talking about minimal intervention, it's not necessarily anti-development, because at the end of the day, heritage conservation is, at least with the work that we do, is about managing heritage resources in order to provide sustainable development. So development will always be a part of it. What I'm trying to say is that with the cross-disciplinary approach that I hope we can actually have, that we're able to, as heritage professionals with all of our knowledge, allow for a different understanding of how to actually do work that does not necessarily mean like a full-on demolition, but just doing what is necessary to be able to adaptively reuse it or continue the use of these buildings that we have. And again, within the lens, it's still within the lens of reduction of resource extraction, reduction of waste, and then hopefully reduction of displacement.
Great. I wonder if from there we can jump to current opportunities, but I also think it would be great if you might be able to share some examples of what's going on in your municipality, or what are you able to be involved in with your municipality to sort of encourage heritage as part of the dialogue, or to encourage building retention, even heritage or not, just building retention at this point. If anyone would be willing to share some examples of the work that's going on in their municipality, that would be fantastic.
I'll jump in. I just did a project with in partnership with the University of British Columbia. So they have a program with which is partially funded by BC Hydro, which is called a Sustainability Student Scholar. Excuse me. And so last spring, I applied to have someone come and do some work in New Westminster to develop a homeowner's guide on sort of the top 3 or top 5 things to do as a homeowner with a heritage home that will both improve the energy efficiency and the conservation of the building, as well as improve the livability standards, as well as retain all of those important historic and character elements. And so that was really successful for me. I was really able to pitch that to BC Hydro and had my student fully funded, which was awesome. So that was a really great opportunity. And now we have a PDF guide available that actually ended up being a 10-pager on all the types of things you can do and what you need to know as a building owner in order to make a historic building really make it green. And that was really exciting. So yeah, I just see Stephen saying, please share the link. I will do. Yeah. It's just coming out published. So I shared it last night with our Community Heritage Commission, and they pointed out 2 spelling mistakes. So I feel a little nervous about sharing it with the group now. But it's just out, so that's really exciting. The other thing that has been great for my organization, which is a really little change, and I'm not sure it's implementable for everyone, but I moved into an office right beside the manager of climate action. So our manager of climate action and I sit and listen to each other over the wall, and have started having really great conversations. And we're doing more work together, even just in the last few months. So that's where I really do see the benefit of bringing people together and bringing each other into the conversations, because she had always thought that heritage people were anti-green building. And so I did a lot of enlightenment for her in the past couple of months. But that's where she was in her field of sustainable engineering. It just, we weren't doing enough outreach with that particular group, obviously. And so I'm doing my advocacy and education right there.
I think that's a really, it's an important point. The notion that casual conversation and less formal sort of interactions often generate tremendous results. The idea that you'd make sure that you had a chance to open conversations with like-minded people who may not realize that they're as on board with your agenda as they are, I think is fascinating. I think that advocacy between our peers is almost as important in a lot of ways as advocacy with communities.
Yeah, for my most of my career, I've had a saying. When I was a planner, I used to say, I want to turn everyone into a heritage planner, and that just meant having these conversations with my planning colleagues who really didn't know anything about heritage. I just wanted them to be aware of it, so it just becomes a bullet point on their checklist when they're reviewing plans, etc. And it's more difficult in this Zoom world to have those informal interactions that I think are that Eric said are so important. Well, and Brittany illustrated.
Yeah, and to further what Brittany is already doing, I think knowledge sharing is a really important tool that hopefully CAHP can actually start providing resources for everyone. Like in the same way as when I went to Scotland, where they have so many resources on how to do X, Y, Z on stone conservation and this and that. All of these small bulletins that people can actually just use and access. These resources could easily help people, especially because we don't have a lot of trade schools that focus on very specific conservation methods or even materials based learning. So I think education, both internal and external, and conversations and conservations, these kinds of things are crucial.
Hi,
Go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm actually a recent CAP member who joined, I think, last month. So I think, and I work in a firm that does heritage conservation and helps clients get approvals for the development projects. So when we were talking about like development, we get involved in these situations and we try to make these projects better throughout the process. So this is probably going to be discussed at a later time I think throughout the month. But I guess what I wanted to share is heritage professionals it's somewhat easy in a way to say that we're addressing the climate change issue. Keeping the building is the greenest thing you can do. So just the intent and this concept is already green and addresses the notion of climate change. I think one thing we can do as well is to have conversations with our clients and other consultants about that, because sometimes we take on projects at the beginning without having these conversations, and then we learn later on that, oh, they want to do things differently, and because we're a service industry, we can't really make too many changes there. So I think one thing I've learned is to have these conversations early on, talk about these things seriously, and if there's an agreement and understanding, then it makes it easier to move forward and make these projects better. So yeah.
Thank you. That was helpful. And I think that this is probably a really good time to roll into the breakout rooms. So in a minute, we're going to open up the breakout rooms. You can choose the room that you're going to, and we'll be able to continue these discussions based on specific topics in sort of a more intimate setting. And we're back.
We're back.
You
Yeah,
just
we're
cut
back.
off Eric.
Was in the process. Yes, we just cut off. Sorry, Eric. That was
Eric was still
Oh.
talking about
an
Windows.
automatic function.
Okay.
Was that the
With
entire
such an
breakout room?
impassioned
Eric
speech.
talking about
No.
Windows? Okay.
It always
No,
comes back
just
to
kidding.
Windows. It always comes back to Windows.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask everyone to mute yourself so that we can just wrap things up by, I'd like to get each of the panelists just to share their key takeaways from the panel discussion and from the lively discussion that I know was going on in those breakout rooms. I'm going to say I'm giving you a minute, but I'm going to cut you off after 2. I don't even know if we've got that much time.
But please, everyone, keep your videos on. It's great to see people.
Eric, did you want to share your key takeaways from today? And it better not be about Windows.
Oh, it's not about Windows. It's about the death of capitalism, obviously. No, I think like the key takeaway is that I've listened to a whole bunch of different inputs and directions people are coming from in the chats and in our discussion. And I think part of the answer is there's no one solution you're going to point to and say, this is the way out. I think, I often say to people, I'm not a linear person. I believe in weaving webs that you put all of these pieces into a loom and you weave the fabric of a solution. The world is not linear, much as we desperately want it to be, much as planning needs to, walk a straight line. And if we only just do that straight line objectively, then nobody can complain and we'll have created some kind of equanimity. That's baloney. The world is 1,000 different inputs to help create those solutions. And I've heard, lots of it today. I've been scratching down notes as people were talking. So I think, let's see the world as a weave of solutions, not all trying to march in lockstep in one direction, hoping it's the right one.
Thanks. Brittany, would you mind sharing your key takeaways next?
Sure. I had something very similar to Eric, actually. I mostly focus on grassroots up because in my practice, I really see that change comes from people who are doing it already, and the legislation usually is just playing catch up. But I think for me today, I really was drawn onto that idea that some more radical top-down change could also support. And so really echoing what Eric said in coming at it from all different angles, that this isn't a problem we can tackle in just one way, but it has to happen every day in the small stuff and in big moments at the big stuff, at the big levels.
Thanks, Brittany. Eli, would you like to share your key takeaways?
Yeah, I think collaboration and cross-disciplinary approach is really important in continuing these conversations and conservations. Everyone kind of mentioned that we are not getting heard, and that resonates a lot to me because I'm young, I'm a person of color, and whenever I sit in any of these meetings or site reviews or any planning whatsoever, I'm not always the one voice that is getting heard. And so there is also that deficit. So that's one of the reasons why I join boards and why I join those, because I have the top-down approach, but I don't necessarily control the discussion, but I rather do it effectively by talking to the people, the rest of the people on the board. And one of the challenges that I find is how do we as a profession effectively change the perception of built heritage conservation as less of a premium cost, as I mentioned earlier, a capital investment, but as an invaluable resource management tool to reach our climate action target. And I think I'll leave it at that. Reduction of resource extraction, reduction of waste, and again, potentially reduction of displacement. So
really stick to that reduce, reuse, recycle. Perfect.
Yeah, minimal.
Minimal intervention. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think that tied everything together really nicely. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We didn't know how these events were going to go, and I think it was fairly successful, but thanks for your patience while we figured out the technical aspects of it. But we've got another 4 sessions that are going to build on this one. So the next session is the same time next week, September 9th, 12:30 to 1:45 Eastern, and that's designing for the future. And then we'll do engineering and equalizer the following week, trades and climate the week after that, and we'll bring it all together, we hope, although we don't know how it's going to look, because we're all trying to have this conversation as we're going, and we really want to bring in as much input from the community as we possibly can. So thank you all for joining and for your input and for the lively question, discussion, and comments. And we hope you'll join us again next week. And thanks to the
tell
panelists.
other people about this. Yeah, and spread the word. I think the more people we have participating, I think the more interesting it's going to be. Today's discussion was absolutely fascinating. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And thank you, Eli, Brittany, and Eric. We really appreciate you sharing your perspectives from your different communities.